Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will start the webinar in approximately 2 to 3 minutes as we allow the rest of our participants to enter the room. But we thank you so much for being with us today. All right. Looks like people are coming in. So welcome on this Friday afternoon. We're excited to have you join us in what we think will be a really dynamic discussion around building resilient desert agricultural systems and communities in the U.S. and the opportunities that exist. And so we have a panel of amazing experts to share their perspectives and give a little background and kind of just share a little bit of the opportunity in this space and how important this topic is. We'll give it a few more minutes to let folks come in, and then we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll dive into our conversation. All right. Wait one more minute, and then we'll get started. Okay, perfect. Could we transition to the next slide? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, again. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Dr. Lakeisha Odom, a scientific program director at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, or FAR. We'll share a little bit more about an overview of my organization in a few minutes, but I really appreciate you joining us. I just want to give an overview of the way that we will share our time together today. So we'll provide a little bit of an overview of our foundation, and then I will transition to my colleague, Dr. Joey Blankenship at the University of Arizona, to share a bit about an exciting initiative called the Desert Agriculture Soil Health Initiative. And then we have a slate of panelists that will give overview and discussion, and then we will open it up to the audience for questions. Let's see. So I'm looking forward to this dynamic discussion, so I don't want to spend a lot of time with preliminaries, but we have one on the next slide, housekeeping slide for discussion. So if we could, thank you. So for the first part of this dialogue, you'll note that participants are muted, but we strongly encourage you to enter any questions into the Q&A or chat. We will be monitoring the Q&A and chat, and we will have time at the end to answer any and all of the questions that we get from our participants. We also are recording this webinar, and we will share with the participants. We will provide it on our website also. So if anyone registered or there was something interesting and you wanted to get a chance to remember it, this is being recorded, and we will share it following the webinar itself. So I think we can transition. Thank you. So I just wanted to give an overview of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture and share a little bit about who we are, what we do, and why we're so interested in this topic. So for those folks that may be a little bit less familiar, FAR is a 501c3. We were created in the 2014 Farm Bill with the objective to increase public agriculture research investments. We seek to fill knowledge gaps, and we are complementary to USDA's research agenda. Since our inception, we have awarded over 390 grants. We have funded approximately 775 million, and then we have worked with 550 distinct partners. We work across 4 priority areas: cultivating thriving production systems, which house our animal and crop systems work; bolstering healthy food systems, which look at things like health and agriculture, health food nexus; sustaining vibrant agroecosystems, which is the priority area in which I sit, which look at soil health, sustainable water management, and climate; and then finally, strengthening scientific workforce. The reason that we do the work that we do is we recognize that for every dollar spent in public agricultural research investment, it generates at least a $20 U.S. economic benefit. So we recognize the importance and benefit of public agriculture investment, and our foundation was created to support that through public-private partnerships. Next slide, please. FAR has a very unique model in that we have the ability to amplify funding and accelerate solutions. We work very closely with private sector and other non-federal partners. We have the opportunity for rapid response funding, and we have the opportunity for international science partnerships. Next slide, please. FAR focuses quite basically, we funded in basic translational and adaptive research, but if you look at the bulk of our research, we focus on that translational research space. So we look at how we can utilize the benefits and advances found in basic science, develop tools and technologies so that we can have solutions placed in the hands of farmers and producers. So that is our sweet spot, we believe. Next slide. In 2024, we announced an exciting research strategy where we are looking at how we can use our research to support producers and their communities to sustain the environment and enable processors and retailers to deliver food that is equitably nourishable in our population. Next slide. And we work across the food and agriculture value chain. So you'll see that much of our research, and we partner across everything from resources and inputs to production, processing, retail, food systems, and consumers. And we're interested in research that crosses all of these stakeholders that represent our entire value chain. And you'll hear from a number of the folks that represent these spaces in the talk today. Next slide, please. Within our research strategy, we seek three main impacts: sustainably intensified production, increased environmental sustainability, and improved human health. And we will cover all of those impacts in today's discussion. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we fund pioneering research across these four priority areas. And then in the next two slides, I'll focus on specifically within the agro ecosystem, why we're so interested in this particular topic around desert and arid soils and soil health. Next slide. So within our agroecosystem team, we're interested in three main themes: pathways to adoption, so looking at those socioeconomic and agronomic research drivers that influence adoption, informing agroecosystems decisions, so thinking about modeling and practical and reliable information that can help to evaluate trade-offs and how we can encourage and support producers in making those decisions that are best for their production system. And then finally, catalyzing sustainable solutions. So we look at ways in which we can understand and gain more knowledge and technology, look at practices that address present and future soil, water, and climate and biodiversity challenges, and also that we can enable a productive and vibrant agroecosystem. Next slide. But specifically on this topic, I think that one of the things that FAR is looking at, and I specifically as a program director, I'm often thinking about is how we can look at a variety of production systems and meet the needs of those production systems, right? We recognize that the interventions and best management practices in the Midwest or the Southeast are not going to be applicable in every space. So we actually love to try to identify and prioritize providing site-specific recommendations. And we recognize that arid soils represent an amazing opportunity, and there are some clear research gaps that my colleague Dr. Blankenship will share and other folks will share. So we recognize that this kind of is an interesting area that represents some research gaps. There's some opportunity to provide additional understanding of different systems and then providing recommendations to allow our producers in our arid and more desert regions more site-specific recommendations that allow them to have healthy soils and think about ways in which they can increase their resiliency, they can increase their profitability. So that's really why we're interested in exploring this space today. So I believe with that, that is the end of my slide presentation, and I can transition to my colleague, Dr. Blankenship, to share his exciting body of research that he's been doing to date. So Joey.
All right, thank you, Lakeisha. Hi, everyone. I'm really thankful for this opportunity to tell you about this grassroots effort I started about a year and a half ago in partnership with the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture and the ag industry. The Desert Agricultural Soil Health Initiative, or DASHI for short, aims to enhance resilience and sustainability in arid and semi-arid regions, both literally and figuratively from the ground up. Next slide, please. So other speakers on the panel will be diving into this more specifically, but for those of you unfamiliar with why are we talking about food production in arid and semi-arid climates? If you're unaware, these croplands in dry regions account for roughly 45% of the world's croplands and produce roughly 60% of the world's food. I'd like to add, with continuing warming and drying, this is expected to only increase in the future. Given enough irrigation, desert croplands are the most productive agricultural systems in the world because, again, assuming that there is enough water, that's the big if, but you can have a year-round growing season in these croplands, and often, there's no temperature limitation. Next slide. So this, as I mentioned earlier, this is a grassroots effort. And for the last, I would say going back 5 to 7 years, there's been this craving from crop producers in the broader agricultural industry for more information about how to assess and manage soil health. This is an example of a cooperative extension survey back in 2020, I believe, that where 77% of the respondents preferred more information about soil health conservation. The only one that was ranked a bit higher was Fusarium wilt of lettuce, which has a lot of links to soil health. Next slide, please. So soil health is a holistic perspective that integrates physics, chemistry, and biology. And really the key point on this slide is that desert systems have unique soil health risk factors that are not being addressed coherently at the national or global scales. You can think of desert soils as being a different patient compared to soils in wetter climates. Next slide, please. So DASHI was created with the overarching vision to advance soil health knowledge and implementation of profitable best management practices to sustain desert food production and human nutrition for the next 100 years and beyond. Next slide, please. What's been going on the last year, year and a half has really been this strategic planning process to be as really deliberate and inclusive as possible. So on the left, you can see rather than ending with growers and industry, we really began with growers. We started with leveraging a professional facilitator and doing one-on-one interviews with some of the major crop producers that are in Yuma, but that also move up to Salinas Valley during the other time of the year. Cooperative extension, and we had a grower workshop, which I'll give some results, some really brief results here in a couple of minutes, back in November, where we tried to better understand how they view soil health, what they view as the major obstacles and knowledge gaps that need to be addressed. We then took that information in this last spring, really between January and May of 2024. We did one-on-one interviews with really international experts in soil health and spent a lot of time building research teams. We now have about 25 researchers that are involved in this effort, really across academia and government, that are really subject matter experts that are to have these teams ready to go to address these key knowledge gaps. This is all leading to a strategic research plan that is still in progress. I'd say this is an ongoing effort that we really view, these sorts of webinars and eventually a convening on this topic will help crystallize. So we have a clear roadmap for the way future. And really this two-way feedback with corporate, with industry, partnerships, federal agencies, private foundations, and engagement with state and federal legislators. We're really trying, in the one that I failed to mention here is also tribes, tribal nations as well. And this is ultimately leading to the research, development, and implementation. Next slide, please. I just wanted to show, without necessarily naming names, but really the broad support that we're already working with. This was not something that we started in the ivory tower, so to speak, at a university and brought out to industry. This was something that was really, as I mentioned earlier, craved and supported from the ground up by these various crop producers, seed and fertilizer companies, and the NRCS. Next slide, please. as with any new sort of initiative or organization, these values are really key, and I won't read them all, but really want to point out the use-inspired research. You want to make this not just knowledge for its own sake, but knowledge like Lakeisha mentioned earlier that can be implemented and can directly inform agricultural decisions. We need to be agile and responsive. And then the last one, rapid communication with growers and stakeholders. That was really something we heard from growers that we need to have that more rapid iterations, and we want to make this as transparent and useful as possible. Next slide, please. So some we'll go into this more as we have a second webinar later about that'll have sort of these testimonials from growers. We want this, all to hear directly from the crop producers. But I want to, define soil health from their perspective. These are direct quotes. Soil health is an invitation to look holistically at the system. It's thinking about supporting the growth of healthy crops now and 100 years from now. So there's really this long-term perspective. And then finally, the last two are specific really to desert regions. We need to have a good balance of water retention and drainage. The drainage is really important for salinity control and keeping salts at a manageable level. That was a priority that really jumped to the top. Next slide. Okay, and my last slide before we turn things over to the panel is just to really emphasize the linkages between soil health and overall sustainability. Many government and industry organizations have the sustainability goals, and I wanted to point out a few of those, including building soil organic matter, which has the potential to reduce our carbon footprint, definitely water conservation, enhancing human health through these nutrient-rich vegetables that are grown in desert regions. And finally, really by improving soil health, the overall goal is really to reduce external inputs and therefore increase economic sustainability. Thank you very much for listening. And now we'll move over to our other speakers. I think just so that Lakeisha doesn't have to jump on again, we'll be starting. Here are the topics, and we'll be starting with Dr. Tanya Hodges and Dr. Stephanie Selinsky with the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture, or YCEDA. I'll hand things over to you, Tanya.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen really quickly, get everything set up. Can everybody see my slides? Can you hear me?
Yes and yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so welcome to Yuma, Arizona. And when we're talking about Yuma, we're also talking about the greater desert region of Yuma and Imperial, but we call it that. Yuma, Arizona, Imperial, California, sunny region. We are the sunniest place on earth with over 308 days per year of sunshine, which is very important as we're thinking about how we grow and why we are really important in the ag systems, production systems of leafy greens. We sit, as you can see in the yellow section, right on the very corner of 2 states in the US, 2 states in Mexico, and 2 countries. And that is that yellow area. We have about an $8 billion ag economics generation out of that region. That region covers about 10,000 square miles. It's over 200 million servings of leafy greens per day come out of that region alone. And that does not include, any other production across the border. We are known as the winter vegetable capital of North America, meaning that we supply 90% of the leafy greens from Thanksgiving through Easter that all North Americans consume. So that's a very large portion of very nutrient-rich products. Yuma produces and farms on each piece of ground about 2.5 crop rotations per year. And this is due to our sunshine and great weather. We get very little rain. We average only about 2.5 inches of rain per year. During that annual growing season, we have the ability to grow over 150 different crops. And that also allows us to be thinking about crop rotations. How do we utilize our land to maximize output, but also be able to keep our soils as healthy as possible. A little bit about our demographics of the region. In the region, there's about 400,000 people. 70% of our population is Hispanic. We're home to two tribal nations, the Kachan and Kokopah. 21% of the residents in that region, in our region, were born outside of the US. And I gave some little national averages there. We have 2 military bases in Yuma community, and then there's also a military base in Imperial Valley as well. So we have a very high military. 16% of our community has a bachelor's degree or higher. Again, when you're comparing that to Arizona, it's about half that rate. And 18% of our community live in poverty. Again, much lower than the state rate. I put a little slide in here about dietitians as well, because the next slide you'll understand. There's only about 11 dietitians in our population that serve all of those people. So when you start, again, thinking about ratios as we are talking about health of our community. So when we're looking at health of our community as a whole, this is information from Yuma County. When this was during COVID, but you'll get the basic idea of our health. We had very high percentage leading to death of not only COVID, but heart disease, cancer, diabetes. And again, when you're looking at national levels, our rates of these diseases, especially as it relates to death, are much higher than the national level. So there's definitely some areas of interest as it could relate to, why? What's going on here? Obesity, when we're looking at our demographics, we are at 37.1%. 29.6 are physically inactive compared to, again, the ratios in the other parts of our state. So why the desert advantages? I know Joey talked really briefly, and again, through the next webinars, we'll be discussing it a little bit more. Number one, the desert conditions, the daylight, the sunlight hours, the dryness, the proximity to the Colorado River. All of our water comes down through the river that we irrigate from. We do have some wells on the existing level, but even those are aquifers that have leached out through the Colorado River. Our agronomic water use efficiencies, we just finished one of the YCEDA studies. That was a 6-year studies that have shown that on our specialty crop per drop, you'll be hearing that again a little bit more throughout this these webinars, is 80 to 90%. So we grow all of our crops on very flat land, and everything has been lasered. And so that every bit of water that we use is used, and it's all very much calculated. We have a very collaborative environment. Our research scientists working with our farmers, working with our industry people, everybody works together. And that's part of how YCEDA and the work we do have come together. We also are we have regional collaborations in precision agriculture. There's a high demand for an integration of advanced technologies in our area. We do, because of our location, again, on the Mexican border, we do have availability to labor. We have the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture, which is a public-private partnership with the university and our ag industries. And we have all the pieces of the university in our community, as well as other universities and 2 community colleges. So a little bit about the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture. I'm the executive director. It's a very unique public-private partnership that I have not seen anything very similar, especially as it relates to arid land and specialty crops. It's an industry partnership with the university that drives innovation and research. The structure is allowing us to collaborate and leveraging those private funding and guidance to drive the applied research in our environments. The goal initiatives of YCEDA are pest management and disease, soil health, efficiency of water use, food safety, advancements of new ag technologies, and making sure that that can actually get pushed into the field. One Health as it relates to agriculture, climate smart and regenerative agriculture, plant nutrition and genetics, fostering the resiliencies to stimulate our bioeconomy based on the ag economy that we already have. And then, of course, closing that skilled workforce gaps. So again, I'm closing with this slide, just the advantages to being here. Over 170 million servings a day are going out every single day to North America from Thanksgiving to Easter. So again, lots of production, nutrient dense. We are a region that's it's very unique and very, very special. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and transfer to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Next up, we have George Frisvold, who will be telling us about the economic importance of agriculture in the southwestern U.S. So when you are ready, George.
Okay, is this showing up for everybody?
Yes, we can see your screen if you just want to go to slideshow
Slide mode.
There you
Okay,
go.
so I'm going to kind of punctuate a number of things that Tanya was saying. So we had recently finished a study looking at Yuma's contribution to Arizona's economy. So this part doesn't include Imperial, but one of the part of our analysis, we looked at not only what spending and revenue is generated in Yuma, but things called multiplier effects, because agriculture buys inputs, those input suppliers buy other inputs. So there's a round of spending beyond the agricultural sector. Also, people have farm income. There's wages that get spent on consumer goods. So there's a lot of economic activity that's outside of agriculture that wouldn't exist if it weren't for agriculture. And that's what these multiplier effects account for. We estimated that Yuma County's agriculture and agribusiness supported about $4.4 million in the state of Arizona. About 3.9 billion of that is kind of on-farm ag, farm labor contractors, input suppliers, but also university and extension related spending. There's also additional $250 million on forward-linked industries. This is processing, mainly vegetables, getting things to market, the logistics there. Yuma agriculture also generates over $250 million in sales in other Arizona counties outside of Yuma, because there's economic activity that people from Yuma they're importing things from other parts of the state. So that's another contribution. Regional economists look at sectors of the economy based on what are called location quotients. And that's basically the share of employment of a particular industry relative to the national average. So if you look at that top row, it's saying crop harvesting in Yuma, the location quotient is 93.8. So that means that those jobs in Yuma are 93.8 times the national average. And to give these location quotients give you a sense of how specialized an area is at the national level. And so we see, like, for crop harvesting in Yuma, it's 93.8. You go down to Santa Clara County, which is Silicon Valley. If you look at the electronic computer manufacturing sectors, it's 67. Then you get Yuma again with vegetables 58, post-harvest activities 51, farm labor contracting almost 50. Then you get to aerospace in Seattle, that's 34.3. Securities and commodity exchanges in Chicago, 21. Motor vehicle manufacturing in Detroit, it's 18. Petroleum in Harris County, Texas, 17, it goes down. And so a way to think about this is that Yuma is to vegetable production in the US what Hollywood is to the movie industry, what Detroit is to automobiles, what New York is to investment banking. It's just a national, if not international, center of production. This is some more numbers behind what Tanya was talking about. These are regional shares. The top graph, the regional shares of total US romaine lettuce shipments, that I've put red boxes around the Coachella Valley, the Imperial Valley, and Western Arizona. So this is Southwest desert agriculture. And you can see that throughout the different months of the year, those three regions are up at 90% of the total romaine lettuce supply. And what's interesting is that you can see that the percentages shift from desert agriculture to the Central Valley of California. And that keeps the US supply of lettuce and other leafy greens pretty much constant throughout the year because we pivot back and forth between those two regions. But the Western desert is this huge segment of that. If we look at the bottom slide is processed lettuce. So you can think of this as bag lettuce that's going to often like food service, like fast food places, restaurants. And you can see that for Western Arizona, which almost is entirely Yuma, like 100% of it for much of the year is coming from this area. So we talk a lot about vegetables in Yuma, but Yuma isn't just vegetables. Here's the ranking of Yuma compared to other US counties in terms of sales. And so vegetables and melons, it's in the top 0.1%, which means Yuma County has sales that are higher than 99.9% of other counties. For all crops combined, it's 0.4%. For all agricultural products of any kind, Yuma is still in the top 1% of all counties. For hay and other crops, it's almost all hay. This is a USDA category. Yuma, again, is in the top 1%. Fruits, tree nuts, berries, Yuma's in the top 3%. Even livestock production, I've got a little asterisk there because there's not a lot of producers. USDA doesn't report exact numbers, but we can tease out that Yuma is in the top 19% at least in livestock production, animal product production in the nation. It's in the top 22% in cotton production. It's in the top third in grain and oilseed production, which is amazing if you think of all like the wheat farms and all the corn farms and all the soybean farms and the corn belt and the Great Plains, right? You don't, again, you wouldn't think necessarily of Yuma being that large, but Yuma is in the top third of the entire country, which shows the importance of crop rotations that include not just vegetables, but also grains. Turning to water productivity briefly, we were able to put together some US Department of Commerce numbers with USGS water use numbers to compare water productivity across different counties in the Colorado Basin. So there's different ways to look at this, and adding it up to a county level, we looked at what's called economic water productivity. So what do you get in terms of crop sales value per acre foot of water consumed? And across the entire basin, Yuma's economic water productivity was over $1,500 per acre foot. The basin average was less than half that, 692. The median of all counties in the basin was $176 per acre foot. That means half the counties in the entire Colorado Basin have sales per acre foot of $176 per acre foot or less. And the Yuma's values are like about 8 times higher than the median. Yuma generates 18% of the crop sales in the basin, but it only consumes 8% of the water. Another way to look at things is what's called a water footprint, or the blue water footprint specifically, is how much water it takes to produce a certain amount. And you can go online and there's different websites that'll say, well, what's the water footprint of producing a pizza? Or what's the water footprint of producing pretty much anything? So we calculated this for Yuma agriculture, and to produce $1,000 worth of sales, it takes 0.63 acre feet of water in Yuma. For the Colorado Basin on average, it takes 1.44. And again, the median is 5.67. And the graph basically shows that Yuma's water productivity is way much higher than the rest of the Colorado Basin. That's what I have. If you want to look at the slides, you can get more information about the seasonal role of Yuma in national supply of vegetables and some more data on water footprints and productivity. And I would be happy to respond to any questions people have either here or later if you want to follow up.
Great. Thank you very much, George. To keep things moving, now we're going to have, and just to reiterate, if you weren't here at the beginning, we will have a Q&A session after these final two speakers. Please also, well, to do that, please type your questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom of Zoom. Okay, next up we have Brian Golding, who will be telling us, giving us a tribal perspective on agricultural activities along the Colorado River. To you now, Brian, please.
Thank you, and good morning from the Fort Yuma Indian Reservation, established in 1884, 140 years and one day ago. Located along the Colorado River with land in Arizona, but mostly within California. And we share a border with Mexico too. With regard to resilient desert agricultural systems, the tribe had developed such a system, its traditional system, based upon the flood cycles of the wild Colorado River. The system could not provide 95% of the US winter lettuce supply, as it does today. But it met the tribe's needs. If it hadn't, the tribe wouldn't be here today. With Laguna Dam, the first dam on the Colorado River that began operating in 1905, the dominant society created the modern irrigation system known as the Yuma Project. And this is the miracle of the desert that has led to the ability to feed a nation. This required some tweaking, of course, and for the reservation portion of the system, drains had to be installed before the land could ever reach its full potential. And that took some time and caused some delay of the development of the Indian unit portion here on the reservation. But all of this came at what cost? For the tribe, it lost its resilient system and the means with which it organized its material culture and its day-to-day work life. The tribe was given some access to the system, allotments, ditches, seed, implements, training, all in this effort by the United States to make my ancestors farmers. Of course, that was not freely given. Such improvements were paid for by the proceeds of the sales of excess lands within the reservation. But there were several tribal folk, including one of my great uncles, who attempted to learn and practice this new system of desert agriculture. But ultimately, they gave up by the 1970s. And the predominant agricultural activity the tribe engaged in thereafter and continues to this day is agricultural land leasing. Now, perhaps this dismantling of the tribe's traditional system was an unintended consequence of development and building a modern system. And you know, the Society of the United States and tribal people around the United States have dealt with similar situations. nuclear energy and its dangerous waste, gold and uranium mining and their harmful impacts upon the environment. And now we're faced with the rush into AI and lithium mining. Another unintended consequence involves land ownership of allotments. Allotments occurred in the early 1900s after the irrigation system was developed, and each tribal member was granted a 10-acre allotment. But the lack of estate planning, cultural misunderstandings, and delays in the federal probate administration process have resulted in a high degree of fractionation of ownership, with many 10-acre allotments having an average of 75 to 80 co-owners, all holding small undivided interests. And you need a majority of them to consent to an agricultural lease. So this creates an additional burden on agricultural leasing activity here on the reservation. To address this situation, the tribe is actively seeking to attract funding to acquire undivided interests in allotments so that the tribe can gain majority interest therein and better and more timely administer those land leases. In addition to addressing fractionation, land leasing is viable so long as the tribe has access to water and healthy soil. In my position as Director of Economic Development for the Quechan tribe, I work with about a dozen growers who lease about 8,500 acres of land here on the reservation. The tribe has begun to develop its internal capacity to monitor and regulate water use as it holds entitlements to both Arizona and California apportionments of Colorado River water that date back to 1884. But we also seek to raise funding to construct improvements and to the irrigation system here on the reservation, and to play a greater role in bringing this irrigation system that's over 100 years old into a condition that can continue to serve for many, many more years. The tribe is also interested in improving soil health, particularly activities involving regenerative agriculture, and that reduced tilling. We have high PM10 issues here in the region, soil subsidence, and reducing tilling could help with all of that, plus improve soil health. And the tribe relies on the growers it works with to care for the land, and while also meeting their business objectives of feeding the nation and making a profit. And I hope to work with them to incorporate regenerative agricultural techniques into their operations here on the reservation into the future. With that, thank you all for the opportunity to share my perspective, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Brian. That was great. Really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up now with our last speaker. And again, we're going to have time for questions after. Now, I'd like to introduce Paul Brierly, who's the director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture, to talk a bit about workforce, labor, other desert agricultural community strengths. To you now, Paul.
All righty, Joey, thank you. Appreciate being here with my colleagues. I have enjoyed working with all of you. And Brian, I appreciate your perspective. I do want to say I've seen a lot of renewed interest, both at universities and the federal government, on indigenous practices and grant programs and things like that for local food systems. So look forward to continuing to work with you in that area. But it's great to be here today and share a bit about this incredible part of Arizona agriculture. You know, a lot of people, when they think of Arizona, they think we're just one big desert, but that's really not the case. It's quite a variety throughout Arizona of climates and soils and altitudes, you name it. And in fact, we like to call ourselves the nutrition state because of the variety of production that takes place here. But Yuma, where sun, soil, water, and labor all come together, is definitely our crown jewel. You've heard a lot of the reasons, and I like to say that we farm here, we farm in the desert, not in spite of the desert, but because of the desert. If you're going to grow in the desert, really, you're almost assured to have high quality and high yield. Out of anywhere in the world, this is the place that I'd want to turn water into food. Yuma Ag is it's year-round production, but certainly specialty crops are our bread and butter. And yes, we make bread and butter too. Water's been mentioned, and I'll leave that maybe for the end for the Q&A session, but I could talk all day about water concerns, the water research that's going on, the water efficiencies that are being built into the system, and again, we can get into that in the Q&A session. I did want to focus on labor. Specialty crops have intense labor needs. If you think about it, these tender leafy green crops, they're going to be eaten exactly as they're harvested and packed in the field. And I've got a list of the things that you may or may not think about with labor, but these crops require nursery operations for the seedlings. They require transplanting, thinning, weeding, pollinating, pruning, optimizing irrigation, precision fertilization, crop scouting for pests, diseases, and water issues, managing pests, harvesting. Harvesting is not just your basic harvesting, but it's based on market needs for size and quality. They've got to clean and pack the crops for market. Food safety risk needs to be mitigated because most of these crops are eaten as is. No pasteurization, no cooking, no kill step. The list goes on. A lot of labor is needed for these crops. So Yuma and Imperial counties do have unique access to foreign ag labor, being on the Mexican border, but I'm not saying that's easy to navigate. The immigration system, the programs like H-2A, but they do have 10 to 15,000 people a day that come across the border near Yuma every day to work in the fields and the packing houses. If programs like H-2A allow efficient use of that labor, then it works well, but there's a lot of challenges, including an aging workforce and other industries that compete with agriculture, and then just plain border issues too. So this lack of labor leads to a huge need for automation and mechanization. That's probably one of the bigger challenges that this sector of agriculture faces. Thinning and weeding, they've been automated pretty well. They've come a long ways. Laser weeders being the latest thing. Although they cost over $1 million a piece, they do alleviate the need for labor. But crop-specific harvesting has a long ways to go. And that means sensors, cameras, artificial intelligence. All of these, again, have a long ways to go to replace labor on these crop-specific harvesting technologies. And I want to mention, too, that not all technology has to replace labor. In a lot of ways, it can augment it, make it more efficient, make it safer, easier for the workers. So lots of needs in the automation and mechanization areas. And another part of the labor workforce component that I want to talk about is workforce development. Yuma County has many efforts in this area. The community college is Arizona Western College. They have developed certification programs, certificate programs. and they respond to the needs, like fiber installation. I'm going to talk about broadband in a minute. They developed a program to develop fiber installers, food safety, drone operations, you name it. They stand up programs to help people get certificated. And they also partner with the three universities, the three state universities, on articulated degree programs in areas like ag technology and food safety. Tanya kind of mentioned all three state universities are there. They have programs. University of Arizona is the land grant program, and this Yuma being the only place outside of Tucson that they accomplish all three of their missions: teaching, research, and extension. And then, of course, the Yuma Center of Excellence for Desert Agriculture. And you put those four together along with all the other educational efforts, and there's a lot of opportunity for developing workforce that this industry needs. There's another entity called Elevate Southwest that is fairly new, is bringing together funding and all the key partners in Yuma County to develop an innovation hub and an innovation zone. The hope there is to enhance Yuma County's innovation ecosystem and attract students and startups that'll address ag tech, among other future economic drivers. If that's successful, what I envision is people from around the world, as they want to work towards an ag tech career, they would choose to come to Yuma because of the educational opportunities, the internship opportunities, and the career opportunities that are available here. So I mentioned broadband. I can't talk about Yuma without talking about broadband. And why is that? That's because over the last couple of years, Yuma County is on its way to becoming the most connected agricultural area in the world. Right now, they're installing tens of millions of dollars of fiber infrastructure, which includes middle mile rings the county's putting in throughout the county. And the hope there is to lower the barrier for providers to offer service. They're also putting in a wireless antenna network, which will be solely to provide for agriculture users, giving broadband throughout the county. You can imagine what that does for agriculture, but also the underserved communities and tribal nations. Everyone around there is going to benefit. Once implemented, every farm field, every educational and research facility, they'll all have direct access to high-speed broadband, and all that brings, which I'm sure you're all aware. Yuma County can become a test bed for Cybers, which is a huge NSF supercomputing facility, which started working on, they were started to facilitate agricultural research and empowering ultra-precision agriculture. So in my hopes and my vision, when this is all in place, Yuma County is going to become a place that not only utilizes the latest ag technology, but it's going to develop the latest ag technology. And then think of the research that will enable with all these entities. They're developing technologies, working on technologies. And one of the draws for these companies is, even though specialty crops are a small slice of the overall ag economy, these are high value crops, and there's room to adopt new technologies and use them. And then once they're proven out in these crops, they can be scaled to other crops or to other areas of the world. So I pitch it as a good place, a great place for companies to come develop their latest technology. One of the things I did when I was at the university was I was honored to chair the University of Arizona's Presidential Advisory Commission on the Future of Agriculture and Food Production in a Drying Climate. It wasn't about how to fix climate change. It wasn't about how to augment the water supply, but it was how to keep agriculture productive even in the face of climate change. I want to make sure that fallowing farmland isn't the answer. That's what really drives me. I don't want that to be the answer to a lack of water, to the climate change challenges. The commission came up with several research-based solutions, including soil health, that I look forward to being implemented. And I'm sure that that'll be with the support of foundations like FFAR and others on this call. So I'm going to stop there. I thank you for your time and interest, and I look forward to the Q&A session.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. And I'll go ahead and jump into, I think a logical place to start that's come up in the Q&A chat as well is really the role of water research and water conservation, where since we're defining our area by its dry climate, it makes sense to begin with water. I think all of the panelists have talked about water, whether it's crop per drop or just the availability of water. And so I want to try to just tie together two of the questions. One came from Steve Francis, who says that the general literature seems to indicate that long-term water availability to the region is at risk. What is your view on this risk? I'm just going to do a part B, which is really the only common theme being water, is Jeffrey O'Ray, sorry if I mispronounced your name, or Ori, asks, could Mr. Golding share his thoughts on what aspects of his tribe's traditional irrigation practices and system could be resurrected or promoted as aspects of an integrated system to address the challenges of the future? So how about we'll get to Brian secondly, but what do particularly maybe George, Paul, maybe Tanya wants to jump in. What is your view on this risk of long-term water availability in this region?
Well, I would say there's definitely risk regionally to water availability. The river is over allocated. There's more water that people have a right to use than there exists. And climate change is likely to make that even more dire. Population growth is going to put greater demands on that. So the region as a whole is facing kind of perennial water scarcity. But if you think back at that graph I showed, which is kind of the value of output per acre foot, that tells you how much you're giving up if you take water from agriculture. So for the whole Colorado basin, if you were going to take water away from Yuma, that would be basically the most expensive way to deal with water shortages imaginable. There are lots of parts of the rest of the basin where water is used much less productivity. The productivity of water use is much, much lower. And so if water left those regions, the implications for our agricultural production in the region and food supply would be a lot less dire. So Yuma is the last place I think you should probably look from an economic perspective to get water savings. Now, institutionally, whether Yuma has senior water rights for the most part, but you could envision dire cases where reservoir levels in Lake Mead or Lake Powell get so low that water can't be delivered to Yuma. But that's not just a hydrologic choice, that's also a political choice. So part of it's whether people are picking a political choice to deal with water scarcity in the least costly way, or dealing with water scarcity in the most costly way. And that's kind of a social decision, not just a hydrologic one.
And I'll add on to that, George, those are all good points. When it comes to sort of the political side, we have these fights over water and they're at multiple levels. So we've got within Arizona, you kind of have this fight between the on-river users like Yuma County that are largely agricultural, and then the interior part of Arizona that brings in Colorado River water through the Central Arizona Project and feeds the cities, Phoenix, Tucson, and that area. So that's one wrangling for water and one threat to agricultural water use. And then at another level, you've got California and Arizona fighting over who should get more water. And then at yet another level, you have the upper basin states of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, fighting with, maybe that's too strong a word, but maybe not, fighting with the lower basin of Arizona, California, and Nevada. And then you throw Mexico into the equation too. And so there's just lots and lots of political fights, and it's, everybody uses water for some kind of productivity, and George is right. There's areas that like Yuma that are much have much higher productivity, but that's not always known by the people making the decisions. And so that's one of the concerns is, are the people making the decisions going to do that based on what we know about the productivity of the water use?
Great. I just want to mention, it looks like we've lost Brian. We'll see, maybe Lakeisha or Stephanie, you can send him a quick email, or if you have his phone number, see if we can get him back on if it was an accident.
Unfortunately, had a conflict because
Okay,
we're coming up on time. So he
okay,
did
got
send
it.
a message, yeah.
Okay. Lakeisha, what do you think about so we have you know, some other questions I see that are being answered sort of live about Durham wheat. Hopefully that was answered. Maybe one other question, just to not shortchange people, is that, yeah, there was this question about pesticide use and its role. So we mainly had talked about the sort of good of human health, right? That these areas are producing nutrient dense foods and you know, allow a year-round supply of these foods. Does anybody, I don't know if somebody wants to speak to the pesticide use and potential health concerns there for these local communities.
Well, I could
Sure.
say, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, George. You go first.
Okay, well, I was going to say, with one of the things with the Colorado River water, the stuff that the return flows from ag that aren't used up, you know, people often think of that as inefficiencies, but that those return flows are actually feeding the Colorado Delta. And our questioner was talking about the Central Valley. Now there was issues historically with the Kesterson area in Central California, where agricultural runoff was leading to very large environmental problems affecting wildlife and birds. And so ecologists have been monitoring the lower, you know, the Colorado Delta to see what kind of potential effects there are. And actually, over time, if you look at the ecological literature, people were saying, oh, like agriculture, you know, in Yuma is bad for the Delta, but the return flows are actually keeping that ecosystem going. If those waters went to, let's say, Phoenix instead of Yuma, then there'd be a lot less water in the Colorado Delta. And people have been monitoring the Delta for these kinds of, you know, pesticide residuals. And so far, the net effect has been ecologically beneficial. That doesn't mean that's not something that we should always be constantly monitoring and checking on. But to date, the ag return flows to the Colorado Delta have been definitely a net benefit.
Tanya, did you want to add on to that at all?
And I put a little bit in the chat, but because of how we grow year round and because of we're using crop rotations, right now, the excess of nitrogen and nitrates to our groundwater and leaching and movement is, at this point, doesn't exist. And we like to attribute it, and that's part of the science when we're getting to the gaps eventually, right? We'd like to look at that. Is it the science? We think it's because of the way the crops rotate and because of the way that we use our ground throughout the year, that everything that's there gets used, basically. I don't know if that answers your question.
And then I'll tap onto that. And Tanya's exactly right. I mean, the rotation crops have deeper roots and they pull out any excess fertilizer that's left from the vegetable crops. But I also want to mention, it's becoming much more refined, much more targeted. They're doing field mapping, they're doing drone applications. They can do it by, you know, increased fertilizer in certain parts of the fields where they're needed. So it's you know, much more targeted. And then also just that it's a heavily regulated field, and my agency actually does that. We regulate both the products that are used and then the applicators. In California and Arizona are two places that somewhat uniquely really require licensing, annual licensing and continuing education in order to get that licensing for the people applying pesticides so that they're done safely.
Hey, Joy, I think we're almost out of time, but we've got some really interesting questions about folks wanting to follow up. So one thing that we can do is I'm sharing my contact information, but we can send out some information at the end. The recording will be available, but we can also send links to everyone's email because all the speakers, you can find their information on their site. So we'll check and make sure everyone's comfortable with us sharing their email information. And so we can send that out as well to just ensure that some of the conversation that maybe we didn't get to go into great detail, we can still get those questions answered. So that can be a next follow-up. So if we didn't get to your question or you had like a deeper dive you wanted to do and you requested email contact, we can definitely do our best to provide that after the webinar so that you can follow up and have additional conversations. It's always good to end a webinar with more conversation needed to happen. So that means there was a lot of interest. So I appreciate that. So I think with that, we're over time. So we really appreciate folks being willing to stay a little bit longer. And so I will pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Blankenship, for the final word. But we just wanted to thank you again. And Tien, could you share the last slide with mine and Dr. Blankenship's contact information so folks can at least get that? So if they want to follow up with any additional questions, they can go reach out. And then with that, I'll leave it to Dr. Blankenship for the final comments.
Okay, putting the pressure on me, Lakeisha. No, I really want to say, yeah, thank you to all the panelists and to FAR, most notably Lakeisha and Sarah Zubak, who we've been working with so far. Really, the why of this, I just want to mention we're really trying to tell the story, right, of this region and building a research program in this direction. So please stay tuned. We will be having at least one more, probably more webinars leading up to a more of a workshop later this year to really work out the nuts and bolts of funding a large research program that can be, help partially matched by FAR. So we really have big plans. We figured this was a good place to start. So I thank you all for attending, and we will be in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful and safe weekend. Bye-bye.